Rather than worrying about Bob, his stepmother started treating him as a good-for-nothing. "You were supposed to help me, but you ended up in the hospital yourself." "That's just laughable. In this condition, the treatment will be expensive, and you won't be able to send money to me." I was astonished at these unbelievable words from his stepmother and found myself glaring at her. "Bob was driving to take care of you." She looked at me with a smug face and a cold gaze. "But Bob was driving drunk, right? He brought this upon himself." Uncle Bob said to check inside the closet. I was confused by this sudden remark. "Don't worry, Uncle Bob told me to look inside the closet." I'm Michelle, a 30-year-old housewife. I met Bob through a friend's introduction, and we've been married for 5 years. I'm unable to have children, but Bob loves me dearly, and our days are fulfilling. Bob is very kind and listens to my stories for hours. When we started dating, I was struggling at work and often complained about it, but Bob was always there to listen. Not only did he listen, but he also gave me advice and even joined me for stress-relieving runs. He was the first person who ever paid such attention to me, so I proposed to him. I thought he was the one for me, and my friends said the same. Bob was surprised by my proposal, but happily accepted it. I learned at our wedding that Bob was planning to propose to me. He had been discussing how to do it with his friend many times. "Michelle beat me to it," he said, according to his friend. "And since then, we've been living happily together. Instead of children, we have a cat in our home. It was a rescued cat, initially very wary and took time to warm up to us. Thanks to our sincere efforts, it has become affectionate and is now an important part of our family. We named it Marble because of its mottled pattern. Our marriage is like a picture-perfect happiness, but there's one problem. We don't get along well with Bob's family. His mother is extravagant with money and often asks for it. It happens so often that I wanted to complain, but Bob continues to send money saying, 'Mom must be struggling.' Bob is not a mama's boy, he's just worried about his mother. Actually, Bob and his mother are not blood related. His mother and father remarried when Bob was 10. Bob's biological mother passed away due to illness when he was 5. His half-brother, Kevin, was born shortly after the remarriage. Bob doesn't talk much about it, but it was probably a shotgun wedding. His mother favored Kevin, her own child, over Bob. Bob must have felt lonely because of that. He rarely talks about that time. Once, when he was drunk before our marriage, he spoke about it. I couldn't fit in with a mother who only bought things for Kevin. Maybe I was just a nuisance to her because we weren't blood-related," he said, looking very lonely. Since then, Bob has never voiced his complaints about his mother and Kevin. Kevin, pampered by his mother, lacks independence and still lives with her at 35. He seems to rely on living with her, never holding a steady job. He only works part-time at convenience stores or does day labor when he feels like it. All his money goes to his own pocket money, probably spent on alcohol. He loves drinking and gets drunk almost every day. Bob's stepmother, complaining about the cost of living with Kevin, would often cry to Bob and beg for money every month. To me, it seemed like Bob's in-laws were just using him. Kevin grew up spoiled and had been in trouble with the police several times. He started rebelling in middle school, getting caught for shoplifting and theft. Bob, being 10 years older, had to go to the police station numerous times, bow his head in apology, and vouch for Kevin. He even had to clean up Kevin's messes by apologizing to the victims. Apparently, Kevin couldn't resist his desires. If he wanted something, he had to have it. As a child, he would snatch toys from other kids, and as he grew older, he wanted bikes and cars. Stealing bikes or cars was a serious crime, invariably leading to police involvement. Kevin eventually dropped out of high school and has been aimlessly living ever since. In addition to being greedy, Kevin had a habit of looking down on others. He probably felt superior by belittling people. I was an easy target for him. Whenever I visited Bob's family home, Kevin, lounging on the living room sofa and fiddling with his smartphone, would start insulting me. "You always look so plain. Well, I guess you're just right for a guy like my brother," he'd mutter to himself, not even looking at me. I would just bow my head in silence, not wanting to cause any trouble. I wanted to get along with Bob's family, but instead of defending me, Bob's stepmother would take Kevin's side. Bob, being the eldest, didn't even bother to take care of his parents and left home. But Kevin stayed. He's such a sweet kid, Bob's stepmother would say. Kevin's staying wasn't for his mother's sake. He simply lacked the financial means to live independently. He just wanted to leech off the comfort of his parents' home, like a parasite. I wanted to retort, but it was clear that arguing would be futile, so I just kept quiet and forced a vague smile. Arguing with his stepmother, who was siding with Kevin, would have been pointless. The only one who was kind to Bob and his family was his father, but he suddenly passed away. Passed away last year. Adding to the tension between our families, Bob's family owned quite a bit of land, as their ancestors had been farmers. To avoid inheritance disputes, Bob's father had made a will and left it with a lawyer. According to the will, Bob would inherit the house and land, while the savings would be divided between his stepmother and Kevin. The land had become fallow, generating no income and only incurring taxes, which made his stepmother and Kevin reluctant to inherit it. There were no objections to the will from his stepmother, Kevin, or Bob, so the inheritance was divided accordingly. Later, the lawyer confided in me, Bob will surely make good use of the land. Be careful, as his stepmother and Kevin will likely spend their money quickly, he relayed his father's message. His father had recognized Bob. He probably felt guilty about how his wife treated Bob and left the land to him as a form of atonement. He wanted Bob to be happy. After his father's death, I thought we would become estranged from Bob's family, but his stepmother said she wanted to keep in touch more than ever. I was wary, suspecting an ulterior motive, but Bob was happy with his stepmother's request, saying they should keep a good relationship. Mom must feel lonely without Dad. Despite everything, she raised me well. Now it's time to repay her. I couldn't agree. They had used Bob so much, and it seemed they were planning to do the same again. But seeing how happy Bob was, I couldn't say anything. Instead, I poured out my frustrations to our cat, Marble. Marble would curl up on my lap and listen as I vented. After that, Bob's stepmother started exploiting us even more. It was more like being used as a workhorse. Anyway, Bob's mother keeps calling either me or Bob. It takes about an hour by car to get to his family home, which is just over a mountain. His mother calls us for petty reasons, like the light bulb might go out, I need a ride for shopping, or there's a bug in the house. It feels like harassment. Then it escalates to, I'm short on money this month, so send more. I was furious with her selfish behavior, but Bob happily obliged. I questioned it, especially when it came to money, but I couldn't stand against Bob's desire to help his mother. Her argument was that Bob, being the eldest and having inherited the house and land, should naturally take care of his parents. But didn't she and Kevin inherit the money? It's strange that they're asking Bob, who's already paying the taxes, to arrange for more money. As the lawyer said, perhaps they've already spent the inherited money. What worried me was that Bob often came back from his home looking upset and downcast. Seeing Bob's unusual demeanor, I decided to ask him, Your complexion is off. Did your mother say something to you? Bob shook his head and mumbled, Well, it's probably my fault. With that, he left the room and went to take a bath. In hindsight, I wonder if things would have been different if I had pressed him more at that time. I couldn't help but feel regret as I got caught up in an unstoppable event. About a month later, during a 3-day weekend, Bob and I planned a trip to a hot springs spa. Oddly, the night before Kevin came to our house, he wanted to have a drink with his brother after a long time and brought an expensive whiskey. Bob was delighted to welcome Kevin. That day, Kevin was unusually cheerful, not only refraining from insulting me but even complimenting me. The house was neatly organized, the food was delicious, and I couldn't help but feel flattered when he said, I wish I had a wife like you. Feeling uncomfortable, I reminded Bob, Remember, we have a trip tomorrow, so don't overdo it, and I retired to our room early. Bob seemed to be having a great time and continued drinking late into the night. I could hear their lively voices even from our bedroom. The next morning, as I was getting ready for the trip, Bob received a call from his mother. I had a bad feeling. Bob's expression turned serious. That's terrible. I'll come right away, he said. Hearing this, I looked up to the heavens. There goes our trip, I thought to myself. Mom's got a high fever. I'm gonna take care of her now. As I packed our travel bags, contemplating the trip cancellation, Bob, with a serious look, said, "Mom wants you to come too, to help with meals." Bob woke up Kevin, who was sleeping on the sofa, and told him about their mother's condition. Bob and I drove our car and Kevin drove his, heading to their family home. Honestly, I didn't want to go. But I couldn't just ignore his sick mother. So I got into the passenger seat. I was concerned whether Bob was still affected by last night's alcohol. Sensing my anxiety, Bob reassured me I had a whiskey for my first drink, but then switched to barley tea. I didn't want to overdo it, thinking about our trip. He's truly kind-hearted, just like my husband. The drive to his family home takes about an hour, crossing over a mountain. Bob drove with a serious expression. As we went over the mountain pass, the car's speed started to increase. I could even hear the tires screeching on the curves. Feeling scared, I asked Bob to slow down a bit. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed that Kevin seemed to be lagging behind. Bob suddenly voiced his concern. "The brakes aren't working," he said with a serious face, sweat forming on his forehead. I looked at him earnestly, trying to understand. But it's only been a week since we got it back from the vehicle inspection. We had sent the car for an early inspection before the trip, thinking it was better to be safe than sorry. The car had returned without any issues, but could the brakes really fail like this? At the next curve, the tires screeched loudly. I grabbed the passenger seat handle in desperation. The car kept speeding up, swerving out of the lane and getting honked at by oncoming traffic. The car swerved out of its lane and was honked at by oncoming vehicles. In the next curve, the car didn't slow down. It veered into the opposite lane and crashed into the guardrail. As the car scraped against the guardrail, making a left turn, we faced an unfortunate reality. The guardrail had ended. The car flew off the curve, plunging down the cliff below. It probably fell about 15 feet before crashing into the ground. The airbags deployed, blocking my view, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital room. For a week, I alternated between consciousness and unconsciousness, fully regaining my awareness only a week after the accident. I immediately asked the nurse about Bob. The nurse hesitated and told me to wait for the doctor's explanation. I waited anxiously, and finally the doctor arrived. He checked my consciousness, heart rate, and oxygen saturation and muttered, "You're okay now." Then he cleared his throat and explained Bob's condition. Bob was still unconscious, in a coma. There was a chance of recovery, but it was uncertain when. In the worst case, he might remain bedridden for life. I couldn't believe it. I kept picturing Bob's smiling face, his innocent expression while playing with marbles. But then, the image of Bob gripping the steering wheel and screaming came to mind, and I started hyperventilating. I was given a sedative and fell asleep again. It was 3 days later when I fully grasped the reality of seeing Bob bedridden. From then on, I visited Bob daily, talking to him desperately. "Stay strong, get well soon, let's go home." Bob didn't regain consciousness. But I didn't give up and kept talking to him every day. About a week later, Bob's mother came to visit. Instead of showing concern for Bob, she started treating him as a good-for-nothing. Instead of coming to help me, he ends up in the hospital himself. It's laughable. With his condition, the treatment will be expensive, and he won't be able to send money to me. I couldn't believe her words and found myself glaring at her. Bob was driving to take care of his mother, I explained. His mother looked smugly at me. With a cold gaze, Bob looked smugly at me. But was he really drunk driving? He got what he deserved. I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Bob had been drinking tea all along, hadn't he? So why would they say it was drunk driving? I tried to ask Kevin, who was there with us, but he just snorted and left the room. His parting words, "Don't forget to send money," lingered in my ears. Confused and overwhelmed, I was trying to make sense of it all when my sister and niece arrived to visit me, almost as if replacing my mother-in-law. My sister had moved to a remote island when she got married, so we hardly ever met. She came to see me because of the accident. Seeing my sister and niece after such a long time, I burst into tears, overwhelmed by a surge of emotions. My sister gently embraced me. After I calmed down a bit, she explained the circumstances of the accident. In mine and Bob's absence, she had been dealing with the police and the insurance company. According to her, the accident was caused by Bob's drunk driving. He had been drinking heavily the night before with Kevin, who tried to stop him, but Bob kept drinking. Hearing this, I shook my head in disbelief. This couldn't be true. Kevin must be lying. I frantically explained this to my sister, but it turns out that a significant amount of alcohol was detected in Bob's body. I couldn't understand what was happening. I also mentioned the issue with the car's brakes to my sister. She quietly shook her head. There was nothing wrong with the car. Furthermore, the car had been stolen from the repair shop, making a thorough investigation impossible. I couldn't believe any of it. What kind of conspiracy had we been caught up in? As I sat there in shock, my niece gently stroked my head and started saying something strange. Uncle told me to look inside the closet. I was taken aback, not understanding what she meant. Don't worry, Uncle told me to check the closet. My niece has an unusual ability. She often knows where lost items are, saying they speak to her. She'd only met our cat Marble once, but talked to him like a friend. My niece used to talk to the sky, saying she was conversing with my deceased mother, who she said always watches over me and my sister. It was this niece who told me, "Uncle Bob wants you to check the closet at home." Feeling like there was no option left untried, I focused on recovering to get discharged from the hospital as soon as possible. I asked my sister to bring my computer from home and made a few other requests. She happily agreed, energetically rotating her arms and saying, "I'm ready for action." I was determined to uncover the truth and get back at my mother-in-law and the elusive Kevin. I desperately asked the doctor for discharge, but it was not granted. However, I was able to get permission for a temporary leave. Although I couldn't get discharged from the hospital, I was granted permission for a temporary leave. Accompanied by my sister, I hurried home. I had no doubt about my niece's mysterious ability. Bob must be trying to communicate something. Now, my only hope was in my niece's extraordinary gift. Our goal was the closet. Upon arriving home, it was sad not having Bob there, but there was no time to dwell on that. As soon as we entered the house, my niece, muttering to herself, stood in front of the closet in our bedroom on the second floor. When my sister and I caught up with her, my niece turned to me and uttered some unsettling words. My uncle said I was targeted. What? I wondered what she meant. Could it be that someone tampered with the car's brakes? As I opened the closet, my niece crawled into the upper part of it. I turned on my phone's flashlight to see better, and she was pushing on the ceiling panel. Desperately, I removed the items from the closet and lifted the panel. To my surprise, there was an old, large safe hidden there. It was a dial and key lock type of safe. I didn't have the key, nor did I know the combination. While pondering what to do next, Marble, our cat, came over. As I picked up and stroked Marble, I noticed an unfamiliar small pouch attached to his collar. Inside the pouch, I found a key, presumably for the safe. I inserted the key into the safe's keyhole. It fit perfectly, but even with the key turned, the safe wouldn't open. I still needed to unlock the dial combination. I looked at my sister for ideas, but she just shook her head slightly. Then my niece whispered some numbers into my ear. I quickly wrote down the numbers she gave me. These numbers were given to me by Uncle Bob. He said to tell them only to you, Michelle. I searched on my smartphone for how to open this type of safe. Then I began rotating the dial left and right, aligning it with the numbers. It was awkward for me to turn the dial. I failed twice, but on the third try, the safe opened successfully. My sister and I were so happy that we exchanged a high five. Inside the safe were the deed to the land inherited from Bob's father, a notebook written by Bob, and an IC recorder. I quickly opened Bob's notebook and started reading. The contents were shocking. Bob had indeed been targeted. I couldn't forgive them for doing such a thing. My sister and I decided to plan our next steps. We tidied up the house and left the safe unlocked and easily visible in the closet, then closed the door. I decided to take everything inside the safe with me. In its place, I left a tablet. Before returning to the hospital, I stopped by the police station to explain the true nature of the accident. The police said they couldn't act due to lack of evidence, but they did record the consultation. They also informed me what evidence would be necessary for them to start an investigation. For now, that was enough. I returned to the hospital. The next day, Bob's mother came to check on him. Pretending not to know anything, I spoke loudly to Bob. "Can you tell me how to open the safe at home?" Making sure his mother could hear. She overheard and left hastily without saying a word to us. I struggled to contain my laughter. The next day, I checked the footage from our pet camera at home. Curious about what Marble did when we were not around, I had installed a pet camera when we first adopted him. The recorded footage could be viewed on my smartphone, so I could watch it even while in the hospital. As expected, Bob's mother and Kevin had broken into our house and ransacked it. Initially, they opened drawers carefully, but soon became more aggressive in their search. Then they found the safe in the closet. Although there was no audio, their excitement was evident. However, their joy turned to disappointment when they found only the tablet inside the safe. Kevin tried to operate the tablet. Both Bob's mother and Kevin leaned in to look at the tablet, but Kevin dropped it in shock. After that, they quickly stood up and left the house. I was relieved that I had left Marble at a pet hotel. If he had been at home, he might have been mistreated. I raised my hospital bed and prepared myself. It was about time. As if on cue, Bob's mother and Kevin arrived, out of breath. "What in the world is this?" Bob's mother yelled, holding up the tablet and scolding me. Other patients in the hospital room were startled. I calmly suggested, "Let's go to the rooftop garden. It's not good to cause a disturbance here," and urged Bob's mother and Kevin to follow. The rooftop garden is spacious, usually enjoyed by patients in wheelchairs for walks. Once she confirmed we were alone, Bob's mother began to scream loudly. "What is this video?" She practically threw the tablet at me. Kevin stood there looking lost and downcast. On the tablet was the car's interior footage from the accident. It showed Kevin pouring whiskey into Bob's mouth after the accident. This footage could prove that Bob wasn't drunk driving. This car was reported stolen, right? How come there's such a video? Bob's mother exclaimed. Her face turned red with anger, arms crossed as if she were a volcano about to erupt. It was quite a struggle to find this. I said, smiling at both of them. This car was bought with the money Bob and I worked hard to save. We wanted to take good care of it, so we installed a GPS tracker. Bob's mother and Kevin's faces turned to shock. Perhaps something had dawned on them. Kevin took out his phone, moving to a corner, seemingly to make a call. I asked my sister to track the car. I didn't tell you, but my sister is a former police officer. Bob's mother's face drained of color, turning pale. I showed them the car's location on a map. This is the yard where Kevin used to work, right? Dismantling cars? I believe one of your former co-workers works there. Bob's mother clenched her teeth, her hands tightly balled into fists, her arms shaking. When we traced the car there, it was about to be dismantled. My sister, with an insurance investigator, stopped the dismantling. Kevin came back in a panic. "Mom, it's bad, the car. I just heard about it." Kevin collapsed to his knees. This is a photo taken by the insurance investigator. The brake fluid in the car was severely depleted, even air got in. Naturally, if air gets into a car's hydraulic brake system, it won't work properly. Moreover, the photo showed oily fingerprints all over it. Whose fingerprints are these, I wonder? I asked Kevin maliciously as he sat collapsed on the floor. Kevin kept muttering, "It's not true, it's not true," repeatedly in a low voice. Bob's mother stood there, dumbstruck. Kevin had come to the scene of the accident, but instead of helping us, he made Bob drink whiskey and fled. A passing car reported the accident to the police. As I confronted Kevin, he just clutched his head, sat on the floor, shaking, and started muttering, "Mom, it's all Mom's doing. Why did you do this?" I confronted my mother-in-law, but she remained silent. Can't say anything? Well, I'll explain then. I opened Bob's notebook. It detailed every misdeed of my mother-in-law and Kevin. They had long since depleted my father-in-law's savings. My mother-in-law splurged on designer brands, spas, and fancy lunches. Kevin spent on luxury cars and nights out. They had spent it all within a year of my father-in-law's death. No wonder they kept asking us for money. The notebook also mentioned how they pressured Bob to hand over his land. They learned that Bob's inherited land, previously neglected, was now in a city redevelopment area. Smelling money, they started pressuring Bob to hand over the land. My mother-in-law tried everything, coaxing, flattering, and threatening. No wonder Bob looked so down whenever he returned from his parents' house. If only I had listened to him back then, he wouldn't be bedridden now. Overwhelmed with regret, tears blurred my vision. Bob probably wanted them to get back on their feet. I'll give up the land rights, but if you waste it all, you'll struggle. So please get a job, Bob had pleaded with them. Hearing this, my mother-in-law crossed her arms and sighed. That notebook is just Bob's whining. It's not evidence. I took out my voice recorder. This is the recording of Bob's visit to your place. I glared at my mother-in-law and Kevin and pressed play. Bob, I'd like some tea. The tea leaves are in the kitchen. Got it, the kitchen. I'll make some tea. The sound of a chair moving could be heard. Bob was heading to the kitchen. Listen, Kevin, go to Bob's house and tamper with his car. My mother-in-law's malicious voice played back. She muttered, "Damn it," under her breath. I continued playing the recording. Are we really doing this? Kevin sounded hesitant. It must have all been my mother-in-law's plan. We have to. If both are gone, it's not just the land rights. We'll get the insurance money, too. No matter how many times I heard it, I felt sick. Such malice, could it really be done by humans? My mother-in-law and Kevin slumped down, defeated. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We really needed the money. My mother-in-law cried loudly. I felt a bit sorry for her and bent down to offer a handkerchief. That's when she grabbed my bag containing the voice recorder and tablet with evidence and ran off. Kevin, come on. Startled, Kevin charged at me. I lost my balance and fell. Kevin sneered, serves you right, as he ran away. I slowly got up. How twisted can they be? Running away won't change anything. I took out my smartphone and pressed the call button. Sis, they're heading your way. Rubbing my back, I started walking. I knew where my mother-in-law and Kevin were going. When I entered the hospital room, they were surrounded by the police. I knew this would happen. My mother-in-law and Kevin were hanging their heads. Both had handkerchiefs covering their handcuffed hands. They must have been arrested. My sister was talking to a tough-looking detective. She glanced at me, gave a thumbs up, and winked. The detective looked at me and saluted. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I smiled back. After visiting me, my sister had consulted with her former colleague, the detective. The police couldn't act without evidence. However, if life insurance was involved, the insurance company's investigator would get involved. My sister, advised by the detective, sought the help of the insurance investigator. They used GPS to track down the car to a yard where it was parked. Upon checking the car's interior footage, they saw Kevin acting suspiciously. The insurance company seized the car, and further investigation at a designated workshop revealed the brake tampering. We thought this was sufficient evidence, but just to be safe, my sister left a record of the police consultation. At that time, we kept the discovery of the car from the police. I couldn't be satisfied with just having the police arrest them. I wanted to be the one to bring them to justice. That's how my mother-in-law and Kevin were arrested in this hospital room. As they were led out of the room by the police, I coughed loudly to get their attention. My mother-in-law and Kevin turned to look at me. Don't mess with me, I said sternly. You sacrificed Bob for your greed. Do you realize how much he trusted you? He always hoped you would recover. From my bag, I threw a sobriety flyer from an NPO and a home renovation flyer at them. Kevin, Bob always said you should quit drinking because it's bad for your health. I pointed at Kevin. And you, Bob, was thinking of living with you someday. He was planning renovations for that, but you tried to turn his life into money. I continued to condemn them loudly, and they cowered under my intensity as they were hurried out by the police. As I panted, I heard the sound of sheets rustling on the bed. I approached Bob and saw his lips move slightly. Instinctively, I grabbed his hand. You're too loud. You woke me up, Bob murmured, waking up. My loud voice had apparently awakened him. Though I thought it was rude, I couldn't help but cry tears of joy. I had not given up, but I was prepared for the possibility that he might not wake up. The relief was overwhelming. Bob looked at me with kind eyes. Looks like I worried you, he said. Around us, nurses were bustling, checking his pulse and calling doctors. It was quite a scene. I couldn't help but wish they would be a bit quieter. The doctor checked Bob's consciousness by shining a light in his eyes and smiled with relief. "He's going to be all right," the doctor said, patting my shoulder before leaving with the nurses and giving us some privacy. Finally, Bob and I could spend some peaceful, worry-free time together. Since their arrest, my mother-in-law and Kevin were being interrogated intensely at the police station. My sister said their conviction was certain, and they were likely to receive substantial sentences. She predicted that they would face justice for their actions. My mother-in-law wouldn't leave prison alive. But why did they need money so desperately? The police investigation revealed that they had also borrowed money at illegal interest rates. Moreover, it turned out they had borrowed from several disreputable sources and were subjected to aggressive collection tactics. Even if they got out of prison, they would be targets for loan sharks. Even if they served their sentences, they would still face a hellish situation afterward. It was the niece who revealed their plan to kill Bob. They intended to kill Bob and then me. Without her, Bob might not have survived, and their horrific plan might have succeeded. I am forever grateful to her. Bob's recovery was remarkable. He started walking the next day, and within a week he was ready to be discharged. Before leaving, I took him to the rooftop garden and told him everything that had happened. Bob listened to my story, showing a range of emotions: surprise, sadness, and admiration. I reminisced and ended up crying as I told him everything. Bob gently hugged me and stroked my head, comforting me in his embrace. "Thank you so much, I really appreciate it. And I love you." Wrapped in Bob's arms, feeling blissful, I couldn't say anything and just continued to shed warm tears. Sometime after being discharged from the hospital, Bob returned to work and had fully regained his normal life. There was no longer any sign of sadness on Bob's face, and we always spent our time smiling. And today, my sister and her family are coming over after a long time. While preparing a feast and waiting, they arrived. As I greeted them at the door, my niece beckoned me over. Curious, I leaned down and she whispered in my ear. Hearing her words, my face turned bright red. My sister, noticing my expression, smirked as she walked into the living room. "She said the stork is coming?" She did. Could that mean what I think it does? For now, maybe I'll keep it a secret from Bob.